Oh my God, Sam Seder, what a nightmare. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen. The real uncle, Uncle Sam, my real uncle. He's here with us on this joyous occasion. Well, not necessarily a joyous occasion, but it's a joyous occasion when you're on. But you know, the things that we will be
I'm
talking
very
about,
excited.
the things that we're going to be talking about are not so joyous overall. So, Sam,
Yeah.
for those of you who don't know, it has a show called The Majority Report. I love The Majority Report with Sam and Emma and everyone else. Great show. Watch it all the time. Big fan. And I wanted to have Uncle Sam on because people were saying he was he's a Zionist, which I thought was very funny. But that's not the real reason why I'm having you on. It's been a while since I've had you on, and I wanted to just check in, see how you guys are doing over there.
Um, it's a shit show right now. It's really I mean, we're all doing fine on our show, but it's a really ugly time, and to have to watch this you know, every day, it's just it's painful to see this type of suffering that is that we with our tax dollars, with our government, are enabling in many respects. And so that's difficult. But, all things considered, um, we're doing okay.
Yeah. Couple things I wanted to get started on. So given your background as a Jewish man who is an anti-Zionist himself, I wanted to ask you a couple things because I feel like you can speak to this issue as far as like the reception from the audience in a way that I cannot, given my background as someone who is Muslim. Like I feel like there are a lot of people who are going to be more receptive considering your track record in the space for how many years you've been engaging in commentary and also being a professional speaker. Um, I think that I just wanted to touch base on your perspective on some of these issues. Starting off with Jonathan Glazer's speech. Did you watch Zone of Interest?
I did.
Yeah. He won I think best foreign film,
Yeah, I think Best International.
best international.
I mean, I don't watch the Oscars as a rule, but I did see his speech. Obviously, it's clipped, and I mean, I certainly, the big part of his statement, which was, I think, by some people misconstrued, and other instances like purposefully misconstrued, was that he had said, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, but he said, "We stand here." Now, of course, the guy, he's just done. I think it was like a 7, 8 year long project for him. Zone of Interest could have been 10, about Rudolf Hess's, based upon a novel about Rudolf Hess, who was the commandant of the death camp Auschwitz, and his family lived right next door to Auschwitz. And um, the film is really like a commentary on sort of the banality of evil, to use Hannah Arendt's title when she wrote about Eichmann, um, but about, like, the living next there, and how that's how they just sort of live their lives,
Yeah.
without. And so the guy is, is he's steeped in this, and he said, "We stand up here." I think he was talking for his producers, um, and, and refute our Jewishness and the Holocaust. And that's where, like, apparently, some reporting put a period.
Yeah,
But he said,
the
"We
Hollywood
refute."
Reporter, I think, or no, Variety did that, which is
Yeah,
insane. Like this
insane.
is a premier establishment journalistic outlet for all things Hollywood. The fact that they would flub this quote, I don't think it's a mistake. I just like I can't chalk this up as like a simple mistake. I think that they wanted to draw that out. Like this is a trade publication. That is what they wanted to draw out of that speech.
I mean, whether it was just like incredible incompetence or nefarious, regardless, people ran with that. And the actual statement was, we stand up here and refute our Judaism and the Holocaust being used as a shield or a justification for the onslaught. I don't know how he phrased it, in Gaza,
Yeah.
and so the idea, and that's a sentiment. I mean, um, I think that, frankly, a lot of Jews in this country and around the world feel. I mean, you hear a lot of the protesters yelling "Not in our name." That's what they're talking about. Is that the idea of of killing civilians and and what Israel is doing is really fundamentally contrary to, I think, a lot of people's perceived ideas of Judaism,
Yeah.
aside. And certainly to see the Holocaust, which is, I went to Hebrew school 3 times a week as a kid, but Hebrew was about like number 3 or 4 on what we learned. We learned about the Holocaust. We learned about Israel. And then really cultural things about Judaism. And when I went to Hebrew school, it was only 30 years out from the Holocaust. I mean, I was 10 in 1975, and so I had teachers, Hebrew school teachers, with a number tattooed to their arm, and and the message of the Holocaust, at least that we were taught, was never again. But it wasn't just about Jews. It was supposed to be, never this type of wholesale slaughter. And so to see these things invoked as a defense or a justification for this genocide in Gaza is beyond the just sort of, I think, the you don't need to be Jewish or religious or anything to find what's going on there abhorrent, but it's one more sort of indignity.
Yeah. I wanted to show you another thing from Variety. I'm going to share my screen with you right now, so you can see it. You can see what I'm seeing at least. Here it is. Hold on, let's put you back up top. This is the same Variety trade publication that claimed IDFA's artistic director apologized after protesters crash opening night with banner calling for destruction of Israel. Now, the banner that was calling for the destruction of Israel, of course, read, and this is back from November 10th, was, of course, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now, obviously, discourse has changed from back then, but if you recall, this was around the same time when Rashida Tlaib was censured. But as a trade publication, they still went along with this narrative that, like, saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is actually calling for the death and destruction of Israel at a time when this was the hot button issue. So,
Right.
just some ways in which I think even areas that you would not expect being political while using neutral language and objective reporting from a trade publication that, like, is supposed to cover Hollywood, still making an assessment, making a statement, and showing bias, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I mean, without a doubt. And I mean, you don't need it to see it just in the context of Hollywood. I think, particularly, there may be a slight change in tone in some of the news media, I think, as of late. But certainly at the beginning, and there's always been this sort of deference to Israel. And, as someone who was steeped in this as a kid, it took a long time, I think, for me um, to be fully conscious of that, of just how, steeped it is. I mean, I always knew there was a bias, but I think, like, you're really seeing in this conflict, because everybody seems to be weighing in. I mean, you know, uh, You mentioned I've been doing this for a while. It's actually going to be the 20th anniversary of the Majority Report in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Wow.
And when we started it on radio, Janine Garofalo and I co-hosted the show, and we, I think we were one of the few. I mean, it's certainly even on the network, without a doubt, but anywhere on commercial media, I think we were one of the few outlets where we would regularly criticize Israel. It was not necessarily in.
In vogue.
No, it definitely wasn't in vogue, but
Yeah.
my critique, I think, has gotten more sophisticated over the years. But we got a call the day after we said anything negative about Israel from the Israeli embassy, and they wanted to send the ambassador onto the show, guy named, I think it was Pincus, and I think he ultimately did come on to the show and listen to our critique. I mean, um, I was very critical of Sharon and uh, at that time and the occupation, broadly speaking. But I don't know that I had as much clarity on the history. I mean, I had a good friend who did a documentary
Okay.
about.
To be fair, I will say this. What you're talking about is a time that literally predates the new historian era of Israeli history, I feel like, or was like right around the time
Oh
when the new
no, that
historian.
happened around in the 80s and 90s. But I wasn't, at that age, 80s and 90s. I'm still in my teens, early 20s, and I wasn't. But it was there. I had a friend, a guy named Benny Bruner, and you can see his documentary he did. He was Israeli, I want to say Dutch, and he did the documentary that is available. Or he's done many, but one which really struck me was called "The Great Book Robbery," and it's a documentary about trying to establish that there was, in fact, a Palestinian. The land was not empty. There was no there was a Palestinian culture. There was a Palestinian
Yeah.
civilization. They had and he makes that case through all the books, Palestinian books that were stolen and are actually stored in a subterranean level in in the Israeli National Library that you really can't go in and see. And it was very enlightening to me, and being aware of, like, because as a kid you're taught, like, the land was empty, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera.
For a
So,
what is it? For a land without for a people without land, for a land without people, or land without
yeah,
people for a people without land.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, y- my critique has evolved over the time. Like, I don't, I mean, I think you saw this exchange I had the other day on my show. I never labeled myself a Zionist, although I think, maybe I don't know that I was ever a Zionist. You know, um, Different people had maybe draw the distinctions at different points, uh, but I never labeled myself an anti-Zionist, because I don't feel like I have to participate in the you know this concept. I believe in democracy, and I believe in human rights, and I believe that if you're occupying, land illegal, it's illegal, and
Yeah.
I believe in the concept of settler colonialism, and can make an assessment. I think, to the extent that I've been called an anti-Zionist, it's more by people who call themselves Zionists. But I don't have a problem with it being called an anti-Zionist. But it's not something that you know I spend time identifying myself with, because, frankly, rhetorically, I don't find it um, particularly effective. And if it's not effective in me helping change people's minds, then I don't employ that type of stuff. But um, it it's been a very clarifying time where people stand, and surprising in some instances too, to be honest with you.
So, would you do you mind elaborating on your own personal journey? I've talked about mine as far as like overcoming national mythology and nationalistic myths that you learn from an early age as someone who's Turkish, who grew up in Turkey, who was a product of both the private and public education system in Turkey. Like, I have talked about my understanding of the Armenian genocide and what was taught to me, and how I was, how my opinion on it uh, uh, evolved from an early age, despite the attempts of indoctrination. And I was wondering if you, because I think there's a very good parallel there with respect to the Nakba and also Israel's ongoing occupation as an apartheid regime, and the way that this has evolved into full blown fascism, in my opinion, in the words not just of mine, but also a friend of both of our shows, Dr. Ofer Kasif. Um, I think that it could be illuminating for people who are on their own journey of self reflection and education. For those who are maybe on like the precipice of understanding, despite indoctrination from their schooling.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, I'm 57. So
It doesn't show.
when I well, thank you, I appreciate that. But when I was in elementary school, I mean, I went for Hebrew education 3 days a week after you know regular public school, and until probably I think I was like age. I think I went through most of high school even. Um, and Reform Jew, and uh, you know, uh, the people 30 years out. I mean, we're still very much steeped in the Holocaust, and the the idea of Israel that I was taught was a plucky sort of like David and Goliath story, and Israel surrounded on all sides by its enemies, and how much the Arabs hated the Israelis and the Jews. And it was presented as if this was a sort of like an eternal struggle of religion, and that the only thing that really saved the Israelis was their sort of like um, their superior will, and they were lucky because their enemies were not terribly smart. Like I just remember being taught this story about the Golan Heights, about how like the Israelis had spies who convinced the Syrians to grow trees on the Golan Heights because it would provide shade when they were fighting. And so the Israelis knew where to fire their weapons. I don't know how that story worked, but this is, you hear it as a child.
Hmm.
And the idea of questioning, like, wait, how did the Jews get there? Or like, how long, how many, like, it was all just the Holocaust happened. The UN said, here's Israel. And then the Arabs were mad because they don't like Jews. There was no sort of material analysis of like, hey, wait a second, how did they? We were told there was not. It was just a desert, and they came in and they created irrigation. They grew stuff, and
Yeah, turn the
um,
desert into a fertile land or whatever.
exactly. And I was 15 or 16 and went with my Hebrew class for the summer to Israel, which is like a confirmation class program. And we traveled up and down the country. We worked at a kibbutz for a period of time. And it was in 1982. And at one point, and I feel like it was early on, I can't remember exactly, but I feel like it was early on in the summer. We were up in Caesarea, And we were in the ruins of this like Colosseum, and we saw dozens of attack helicopters going low across the Mediterranean north. And we're like, what's going on? I mean, it looked like something was going on. I mean, because Israel, everybody, you had soldiers, everybody, they carry their guns around, and you get used to that, after a while. But like this was something different. And within, I don't know how much time it was, not long. Maybe we got into the bus, or I can't remember. Um, we found out that Israel had, I think, had attacked Beirut. And I just remember, I mean, I was crying about it. I got into an argument with my rabbi because prior to then, it was a preemptive war in '67, but it was being sold like it was imminent, and the
Mm-hmm.
Israelis just got the jump. The idea was that it's the Israeli Defense Forces. They don't start wars of choice. That's not what Israel does. And that was my whole sense, and I think that was probably the beginning of me becoming, increasingly more skeptical and curious as to like how did this form. And I went to college, and there was really not much, um, uh, you know, uh, for whatever reason, I don't know. It was not. I didn't. I don't remember studying much about it in college, but I was aware. I think through the first Intifada that this was, I mean, things felt like they were changing maybe a little at that time, and then I remember when Sharon went on the Temple Mount and basically lifted, basically lit a fire,
Yeah.
um, and and became increasingly critical of Israel during that time. And I think the Bush administration was the first administration where I became aware that they were, and probably through interviews I was doing with people on the show, that they were not fulfilling the role that the U.S. had in the past, which was to sort of like pull Israel's worst inclinations back from the brink. But we're instead sort of like pushing them, like giving not just pulling the keys away from your drunk friend, but, um, you know, handing them the keys, despite the fact that you bought the car for them in the first place. Um, and, uh, and for, uh, by the Obama era, um, it was I would talk about Israel to some extent. To some extent, it was farmed out to Michael Brooks, who was you know by the time we got into like mid the end of the Obama administration was hosting the show once a week, and he was had studied foreign policy and was much more, I think, sort of engaged in it. And I think to a certain extent I had just basically given up on Israel, and my disposition was basically, I mean, I remember distinctly having arguments about this with, because among Jews and on like email groups I'm on, this would come up. This is sometimes the biggest like political difference I would have with people who, in many other ways, were progressives or
Yeah.
liberals or
Progressive
whatever.
except Palestine.
Yeah, and I mean, I distinctly remember the argument I would take with some of these people is like, "Y- you're you're the one who's endangering Israel, the existence of Israel, because this this cannot go on. The Democratic Party, it was clear, like to me, like when Tim Kaine, you know, refused to go see Netanyahu speak in Congress. I was like, if Tim Kaine's doing this, you guys have a problem. And because Israel is going to become increasingly isolated, and 10, 15 years from now, you're going to have the Christian Zionists in this country. But if a Democrat is in power, they're going to lose their funding and they're going to get increasingly isolated, and it's going to be like a South Africa type of situation, except for they won't take that off ramp.
Well, it turns out
And
they showed you by by being like, nope, unconditionally in support of Israel, actually, as the
well,
Democratic Party.
I don't I think that we are now at the
Turning point.
apex of that support.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
I think
absolutely.
we will never have a Democratic administration that will even come remotely close to how the Biden administration is acting. I think
Absolutely.
Biden. I think is I don't know why, but has some unique. I mean, you
Deference.
saw that story in the Internationalist. It's written in this book by Alex Ward, maybe. Um, have you heard the story?
Menachem
The
Bain?
Begin, yeah, that
Yeah.
Begin to, and you probably recounted it, but it was, when Begin has to be the one saying to Joe Biden, like, "Hey, take it easy. We don't do that. Even though you're saying it's okay for us to kill women and children, we don't do that." When Begin has to be, and this is the guy who was participated in the blowing up of the Hotel David
Yeah.
in 1948. I mean, if that guy has to be the voice of reason, you know that Biden's got some particular, like, I don't know, bloodlust. I don't know what it is, but I
I think
think
Ryan's assessment on your show was actually pretty interesting, where Biden is known as a cipher, right? Like he always finds the middle ground on every issue, and he's just like a perfect political machine in many ways. Whether it was busing and segregation, desegregation back in the day, all the way to super predators, crime bill, noticing that like learning a lesson from the opposition that he had to Afghanistan and not repeating it with Iraq, like all of this stuff. Um, I think all of this stuff played a role in him developing his positions, but Israel was never really an issue that the Democratic Party had even shown a little bit of criticism on, with I guess like Obama being ironically, Obama being considered the exception almost. But like even then, Barack Obama, obviously on his way out, gave $30 billion in a 10-year aid package to Israel for the Iron Dome and numerous other instances. So like, I think he never had like a reason to develop a middle of the ground approach. So that just kind of stuck with him.
you know, yeah, maybe in like again that story about Begin, where you know you get admonished by the leader of the country to be like, no, we're not going to be that vicious. We don't want to associate that. There's something else going on there. And I know Peter Beinart came on the program and he had a good explanation. He's like, if you want to know, you want a sense of like where people stand on this, the 1619 project is a good sort of surrogate in which to assess. Like, if somebody fundamentally cannot believe that the United States was founded uh, appreciate the sort of like settler colonial origins of the United States, and that it's built on the genocide of the indigenous people here. They will not be able to get it with Israel either. They're just too invested in that sort of like that myth. They can't give it up.
They're just riding for all settler colonial genocidal states
I mean, if you're going to
unconditionally.
do for one, you might as
Yeah.
well do for all.
He loves Australia. He loves it all. He doesn't care. He's like, it's great. Um
Now,
yeah.
it's the
He
best we could do at the time.
he needs that Neil Gorsuch approach. And just like being the one pet issue that he cares about that is the exact opposite of what you would think from him.
Yeah,
But it is interesting
I,
because like he claims to be Irish, he claims to be Catholic, and these are like currently with the Pope and also with Ireland being historically an ally to the Palestinian plight. It is very odd that he would take such a staunch ultra nationalist approach to the matter.
And the thing is like it is. I mean, I don't think donors explains it. I mean, I know that he's got some big, Haim Saiben or Sabine
Of
or whatever
course.
that
But
guy's
that's
name is.
consistent.
But I think it's very hard to understand because from a U.S. national security standpoint, there really is not a sense that this is in any way helpful whatsoever.
Oh yeah.
Ilan Pappy we had on the show, he's like, when has Israel ever been helpful from a U.S. national security standpoint in terms of like in practice, right? Its existence. There's an argument. Maybe there's a beachhead there within, and one more opportunity to control, the oil of the neighboring countries. But I mean, I don't think he would have paid any type of like political price if in November 15th he had said we're calling for a ceasefire. I don't think he would have paid a political price. We're going to start to pull back on aid, or we're not even going to put an aid package on the table. I mean, it really is hard to understand, and it is, just from a political standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
But
like the Lloyd Austins in his corner, I think are like genuinely warning him of the backlash and the destabilization that Israel's actions are causing. Because it is like Israel's aggressive ethnic cleansing campaign is now far beyond the point of maintenance and avoidance. We've now gotten to a point where it's like it's an issue that you have to tackle head on. But beyond the lack of like Israel's position as an apartheid ethno state is actually helping America with a beachhead or a forward operating base with like its own espionage tools and whatnot. The destabilization it's causing is obviously far outweighing the benefits that you get from like the Pegasus program or whatever, right? But beyond that, and this is something that you and I 100% agree on, it is horrible domestically. It is playing so poorly because every single instance where Joseph Robinette Brandon goes on stage and says there are red lines, but there are actually no red lines, like he did on this MSNBC interview, the Saturday show with Jonathan Capehart. When he says that, it shows incompetence. It looks like he's an old man asleep at the wheel, which is why someone like Donald Trump, who also obviously benefits from not being the president while this is going on, still is like outperforming Biden by 10 points on the issue of Israel, because at least he has consistency in the eyes of those who are being polled on the matter. Where like Trump is consistently bad on Israel, but at least he's consistent. He's showing strength and support for Israel. Biden, on the other hand, is losing the demographics that he obviously needs for re-election, whether it be the Arab vote in key states, whether it be the pro-Palestinian vote, as a younger demographic is clearly overwhelmingly in support of Palestinians now. He's losing out on these key demographics in all states, but especially so in places like Michigan, obviously, and even Minnesota. And it is entirely, in my opinion, due to the fact that he looks weak and he looks like he's asleep at the wheel, because what he's saying does not match what people are seeing. Every time he says, "Oh, Israel, I called him a son of a bitch," or whenever you see a leak in the news about how like he's really gonna change pace on Netanyahu's actions in Gaza, and then you see more children being slaughtered, you see more women and children being ruthlessly massacred, you see the flower massacre that occurred at the humanitarian aid convoy. People are like, well, what the fuck is this guy doing? You're losing out on both ends at that point. The other thing I wanted to say, was another thing I wanted to mention. Oh,
well,
Benjamin
let me,
Netanyahu's reaction also consistently
yeah.
undermining him makes him look, even as even on the international stage, it makes him look like we can't even control our attack dog at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've been saying for a while that I think like even the age stuff with Biden is fundamentally the subtext there is leadership, right?
Yeah.
Like, look, if I think somebody can do the job, I don't care if they're 110. It's a leadership question, and so he botched this in my estimation with the immigration thing too, because he was out there saying like, I wanted them, like I was willing to do what they wanted to do, but I couldn't convince Congress to do it because the guy who's not president is in charge of them. And it's like, well, wait a second, dude. All you're saying is if we want action on this, hire the leader who has control of Congress.
Yeah.
And this whole thing with Netanyahu, it plays into that same thing where it's like, you say they shouldn't do this, they do it, and you're just like, they shouldn't do it. All you're putting aside all the sort of like,
The immorality.
yeah, and the concrete aspects of this. The subtext is I I have control of this situation. I'm not a leadership position. And I think that's I would say that from a general the general electorate, even if they don't care about the Palestinians, they're seeing somebody who is somewhat feckless, or the news media is seeing someone who's feckless, and this basically becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Yeah.
Like that narrative gets established, and they start to apply it to everything. And then the other thing is, you said like, how it's hurting him electorally. I think it's hurting him electorally in that way, in terms of that the sort of subtext narrative. I think it's hurting him, and I think it's who knows how many actual votes he's losing for this. But I do know that in talking to sort of like more or less normie to progressive Democrats who are in the sort of like organizing space, it's depressing them. And
Yeah.
so, like, even if you don't lose all of these votes directly, the second order issue is that the people you need to go out and inspire people to vote for you are just feeling like my stomach's churning
Yeah.
because, and these are the people who are paying the most attention to what's going on.
Yeah, that's why the vote uncommitted campaign is so significant, in my opinion, which the media is now like no longer covering as much, in my opinion, after Michigan, which I suspect could be deliberate because it is the exact type of drama that they love, that brings in ratings and like shows a little bit of chaos going on. Um, but these are not uncommitted voters, uncommitted to the Democratic Party. I mean, these are voters who are committed to the Democratic Party, because the real uncommitted voters just don't even go out and vote in the primaries, and there are
Yep.
many of them, right? That's the average voter. That's the reason why the primaries are not attended as broadly as the general election. And these are the people who lead the activist base, the progressive base of the Democratic Party, who are likely Democratic Party voters, in my opinion. And regardless of our opinion on this matter, that assessment has also clearly been made by the Biden administration as well. Like I think they are genuinely seeing that, and it is definitely causing a little bit more chaos and a little bit more fear, even though it seems like Biden personally is like a very vindictive and very stubborn person. If we're going to get into the palace intrigue of it all, and I think that is what's motivating him, given the New Yorker magazine piece that came out like last week, where he openly said, "Well, I don't care about the polls because guess what? They were wrong in 2022, which they really weren't." And that they and they were wrong in 2020. So why should I listen to them now? I don't know. It's just it is very terrifying that they're banking on people just simply forgetting what is going on
Yeah,
in Gaza by the time November comes around.
yeah. I'm with you 100% on that. I mean, I think like you know, um, having I know guys like Biden, in that age bracket, maybe related to some, and there is a quality of like, hey, maybe you don't need to drive at night as far as you're driving or attempting to drive. It's not a problem for me. Look, the problem, the dent on that car is because they're making parking spots, smaller. They're making them narrower. That's the problem, not my driving. And there's a real quality to Biden about that. Like the guy is, I don't know if he's ever been particularly flexible, but in this instance, there is a certain, I don't know. I mean, there's a certain, I think, delusion. Maybe you see a little bit of like they feel like they need to pay a little lip service. But the amazing thing is, too, is that like, well, what makes them think this is going to end? Like, they can't have thought in November that, okay, this is going to go until next November and we'll just deal with it. Like they had to have thought, like at one point they were like, this is going to wrap up by January. This is going to wrap up by March. I mean, I think there's reporting that said that that was their belief. And it's quite clear that Netanyahu has absolutely zero incentive to do anything of the sort. And here's the thing that really scares me too.
Netanyahu also likes Trump. Like Netanyahu
Oh,
would benefit from a Trump reelection.
100%.
And he's
100%.
I think he's open about that too. Like, I think the reason why he keeps saying no two states immediately after Biden says there will be a two-state solution, which in and of itself is already like a contested concept at this point because of, what the two-state solution in theory versus what it looks like in practice is very different. It's just been a continuation of settlement expansion under the guise of like a potential two-state. But beyond that, it's just very obvious that I think Benjamin Netanyahu comes out and says the things that he said yesterday, specifically because he wants to undermine Biden.
Oh, I mean, look, I I I I think he it's a huge twofer for him to embarrass Biden in this way. Huge twofer. Um, and I think he probably calculates the longer I hang in here, the better. The better for Trump, and then ultimately the better for me. And I look, I'm not convinced that whatever force helped Hamas to make this attack and this timing, knew that this was also going to put the United States in a difficult position and put Biden in a tough position. I can't imagine they ever thought that he would be this sort of like all in. But there's no doubt about where Netanyahu is on that. And it seems like the Biden administration just had they did not calculate this, and they didn't even appreciate the situation. I think Biden walked back from this red line thing. My understanding a little bit later today, or at least the administration did. But
I mean, he walked back on it in the interview where he says there are red lines, and then he goes, but there are no red lines for weapons delivery. So there are no red lines then.
He said technically he said no red lines for defensive weapon. He said like the Iron Dome. And so I don't know. Maybe I was parsing that too.
I think that is that is the legalese that they engage in an effort to say, oh, we're sending Israel, and you've talked about this before, we're sending Israel defensive weapons, actually only defensive weapons and not offensive weapons. We're just like replenishing their munitions that are depleted in defense of Israel. Why are those munitions being depleted? Well, because they're using those weapons in a forward posture in their illegal occupation and further ethnic cleansing in Gaza. I think that's like a way to get around.
There are specific armaments for Iron Dome, right? Because I'm looking down the line when somebody in the Senate is going to raise this bill. I don't know when it's going to be, but they're going to say we're cutting off all weapon sales except for these specific armaments.
The Tamir interceptors, I think they are specifically.
Yeah, and so something to that effect. Now, do I think that Biden is sincere with this? I doubt it. But the fact that he's having to articulate this stuff and try and put himself in a position where, because they must be looking at this going like, we've underestimated this on some level. And what are we going to do if this is happening in June? What are we going to do if this is happening in September? Like, where do we go? What is our fallback? And um, I, but here's my big fear too: is we're going to put within a month or two, we're going to have this temporary pier built so that U.S. ships can come and
Yeah.
offload aid. You know, it's unclear to me how that aid's going to get off that temporary pier and get distributed, but it seems to me that both Israel and Hamas have great incentive to mess with that, to involve U.S. Military personnel, to blame the other side. It is like the idea that we are actually, I remember when Reagan sent peacekeepers into Lebanon and 250, I think it was, Marines got blown up. Reagan could get away with something like that, but and leave. But Biden, he may have to go the other direction. Like, the idea that we're even coming even remotely close, never mind what we're doing with the Houthis, but the idea that we come even remotely close to getting involved in an armed conflict because of this is just, it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing that there would be this level of risk taken on by the United States when the alternate is we cut your weapons, send the trucks.
Exactly. It's just like it's taken a long way to grab your ear grab your left ear with your right hand. It's just like there is no reason to get into all of this and basically make this process infinitely harder for yourself and convoluted and potentially really devastating when. And this is the fundamental question that really frustrates me when no one asks this question to Biden directly in media, which is, why is there need for a pier to begin with? Are there no humanitarian aid convoys that are waiting? Why is there even a need for aid in Palestine? Let's ask that question. Is this a natural disaster? Is this, is this a byproduct of a typhoon? Did an earthquake happen there? Or is it actually our ally engaging in a deliberate, calculated ethnic cleansing and ethnic displacement campaign? Oh, shit. I think my dog groomer is here. 1 second. Sorry.
Good. I mean, dog groomer aside.
He just knocked like the cops for a second. Hold on. I'm going to run this video and hear Biden's thoughts real quick. You can see it as well. And
Prime Minister Netanyahu, as Israel defends itself from Hamas terrorists who murdered more than 1,200 Israelis and still hold more than 100 hostages.
What is your red line with Prime Minister Netanyahu? For instance, would invasion of Rafah, which you have urged him not to do?
It is a red line, but I'm never going to leave Israel. The defense of Israel is still critical. So there's no red line. I'm going to cut off all weapons so they don't have the Iron Dome to protect them. There's other ways to deal with the trauma caused by Hamas.
But the red line is Rafah. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu joins us live from Jerusalem. We don't have to give you the news. You follow American news as if you're still here, Prime Minister. His red line is Rafah. Don't go into Rafah. What's your response?
Look, the president and I have agreed that we have to destroy Hamas. We can't leave a quarter of the Hamas terror army in place. They're there in Rafah. This would be equivalent to saying, after the Allies fought back, gone through Normandy, went through Germany, and you'd say, well, we'll leave a quarter of the Nazi army in place and we won't go into Berlin, the last stronghold. So I think that if the president means by that we should first enable the safe departure of the civilian population from Rafah before we go in, we agree with that. We don't need any prompting.
That's not what he said,
let's make sure that
but that's not what he said. He doesn't want you to go in.
I think you have to ask him what he said, because he said that he agrees that we have to destroy Hamas is a fighting organization. That's what we intend to do. Look, it's either Israel or Hamas. There's no middle way. I mean, we have to have that victory. We can't have 3/4 of a victory. We can't have 2/3 of a victory, because Hamas will reconstitute itself with these 4 battalions in Rafah, reconquer the Gaza Strip, and do the October 7th massacre over and over and over again. And for us in Israel, not merely for me,
Mr. Prime
but
Minister,
for the people of Israel, that's a red line. We can't let Hamas survive.
Mr. Prime Minister, we don't want to put you in a difficult position, because we know that you have to work with the U.S. I know we're still strong allies, but there's been multiple comments, whether it was a red line from the President of the United States or Kamala Harris saying that we need a ceasefire now. I know there's been conversations in the press about a fractured relationship. Can you tell us about what's going on between you and the president? Because right now, what I'm hearing from the IDF and some of my friends that are going out there to battle Hamas is that they don't have the support truly of the United States right now, and that you guys are being pressured to come off the gas a little bit. Is that true?
Look, we have our agreements on the basic goals, but we also have disagreements on how to achieve them. Ultimately, it's Israel that has to decide. Our neck is on the line.
Are they encouraging you to get off the gas, though, Prime Minister?
Well, I'm telling you that we're not getting off the gas. I'm telling you that we have to take care of Israel's security and our future, and that requires eliminating the terrorist army. That's a prerequisite for victory. That victory is important not only for us, it's important for the civilized world as we're fighting these barbarians. And let me tell you something. You know, I've seen these recent polls where 82% of Americans support Israel in its battle against Hamas. 82%. That's been constant over the last 5 months. So they recognize that our battle is your battle and our victory is your victory. And I'm sure that deep down, everyone in Washington understands that. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to defeat Hamas. We're going to do what is necessary to minimize civilian casualties, do the humanitarian aid, something that we believe in. But we have to destroy this terrorist Nazi army. Otherwise, there's no future.
It's crazy that they just have direct line to Benjamin Netanyahu. Like,
oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he's actually just in an office at Fox. But what's also really telling about this is his analogy as to why they have to keep going into Rafah is as if the United States left 1/4 of the German army, operating, or wouldn't go into Berlin. And I hear this quite a bit when people justify like how much destruction Israel has wrought in Gaza. They'll cite Dresden, or they'll cite Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and the idea that you can justify this carnage by comparing the threat between Hamas and Germany and the Imperial Japan is just absurd. It's just absurd, and they've got to make that leap to justify it. But it doesn't work. I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. It's not the same.
Yeah, it's just it's wild for a couple different reasons, including something that Biden himself mentioned, which is that we wrote rules after, like he literally said that in an interview, if I recall, where he was talking about the Dresden comparisons ahead of time. Like he was getting ahead of that narrative because he's heard it so many times probably. That like, one, we did write rules, new rules of engagement after that. And two, this is one thing that always frustrates me about the comparisons to the Holocaust, which Benjamin Netanyahu, as I'm sure you know, is a Holocaust revisionist himself. So this is something that he likes doing regardless, is that if there is a group, if there is a militarized state that is like engaging in ethnic cleansing and ethnic slaughter, the comparison falls not on the hands of a resistance group that will take it to violent means, built originally by like fundamentalist guys as well, for sure. It's the other side. It's Israel. Like Israel is infinitely closer to the mechanized slaughter than Hamas is. Neither of which is, I'm saying, identical, obviously, to the atrocities of the Holocaust. But like one side is clearly closer to the Nazi regime than the other side.
Power differential. You look at the power differential.
Yeah.
I mean that's just what it comes down to. I mean, you just look at the power differential. and who has control of their territory and who does not, and who, where the mass starvation is happening and where it's not. I mean, the power differential is quite obvious. This is not, a world war. This is a highly sophisticated country with far more advanced weaponry than maybe anyone else around, frankly, in that neighborhood. And certainly, more so than Hamas. And again, you're not going to completely eradicate them. And the idea that, like, that Hamas is some type of sort of like alien force that can be, the Israel, it is almost impossible to imagine that Israel hasn't created 5 different variants of Hamas in what they have done to the population. It would be astonishing.
Yeah,
Israel
Hamas
continues
itself.
to think.
Hamas itself
Israel-
is an evolution. Hamas's tactics itself has become an evolution due to Israel's increased violent actions. Like, I think Zach Foster. I don't know if you've ever had him on your stream or not, but he is a Zachary Foster is a professor. He's a PhD at Princeton, a historian of Palestine, and he has like documented each step and the evolution of Hamas all the way from the Islamic Charity, which it began as a Muslim Brotherhood cutout, all the way into like the old charter, new charter, and how Hamas changed its tactics throughout time as a consequence, as a reaction to the Israeli negotiations, peace process, and the obvious continuation and the rapid expansion of the settlements, and also Israel's suppression of like religious freedom and whatnot in the West Bank, and how it became what it is. Everybody understands this. Like everyone in Israel understands this. Former Shin Bet officials understand this reality, and Israel itself understood this reality in its outward communication to the Trump administration. One key detail I bring up from time to time is that I believe in 2017, Donald Trump no longer was giving any aid, I think due to one of his campaign promises. They were going to completely shut off aid to Palestinians. Do you remember this?
They stopped funding UNRWA.
Yeah.
They cut off funding to UNRWA.
Yeah. And you know who was actually against that at the time? The Israeli government. The Israeli government itself had petitioned the Trump administration to not cut funding because they recognized that this would be a national security issue for Israel if the Palestinians were completely starved out, that it would become, the situation on the ground would get worse. So the fact that Israel in 2017 recognized this reality, and yet the outward communication coming from Benjamin Netanyahu and others within the Israeli government, including the defense minister, is the exact opposite now. Genuinely, I think shows that the situation has gotten worse and the fascism has completely taken hold.
If you can, I think if people can understand the concept of Donald Trump doing whatever he can to get elected president so that he can stay out of jail, which I think a lot of people can, then I think you can start to understand, and doing whatever he can, despite what it means for the country, the future of the country. Then I think you can begin to understand Bibi Netanyahu, because I think for him, the more turmoil, the better for his personal sort of lifelong trajectory. Like, I think he knows that the moment there is any type of calm, any type of peace, any type of argument that there is, no immediate threat, I think he knows that his chances of going to jail are, through the roof at that moment. And so I think he's going to maintain as much belligerence as possible. I don't know if Joe Biden can't can't see what just about every observer of, I mean, I'm talking Israeli.
Yeah.
You know, the Israeli press knows this. That Netanyahu is hated, but they're not going to get rid of him until this, war is over.
Yeah.
And so he is completely incentivized to make sure that that never happens, regardless of whether it's in, whose best interest it's in. I mean, it's 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 a disaster for, obviously, for the Palestinian people, but it's gonna I think it's a disaster for Israel, and it's a disaster for the U.S.
No,
Not
absolutely.
at the same
It's
level, but
I think here one last thing before I let you go. Thank you so much for coming on for as long as you have. One last thing I wanted to talk about is, I guess, like, liberal Zionism used to be the primary communication to the Western world, and I feel like post October 7, but even before October 7, like in the last couple of administrations, liberal Zionism kind of like went away as far as like a Hasbara mechanism. And I think it is that arrogance that was born out of the unconditional support that the Western world had shown Israel, and the nature of like reactionary fascist ideology constantly increasing the pressure points and squeezing as much as squeezing the Palestinian population as much as it can in a and also endlessly propagandizing that in a self-reinforcing mode of propaganda. I feel like this created an attitude that is also playing into Israel's demise, because, like, without Western support, obviously key Israeli officials understand, without Western support, Israel does not exist in the way that it does. No way, no how. Whether it be political cover that America offers, more importantly than anything else, or whether it be the direct weapons shipments. People will say it's only 5% of the Israeli defense budget. Doesn't matter. It is far more important that America is always providing political cover for Israel and also offering weapons. And I think that the liberal Zionist exit ramp here is so clear to me. Lay the blame almost entirely on Benjamin Netanyahu and bring in Benny Gantz, which they're kind of doing now. I think they're positioning Benny Gantz as like the new leader, because they had Benny here and talked to him directly, right? Kamala Harris met with him. And yet it's wild to me that Biden has not been pushing that exit ramp that has been given to him, that allows Israel to continue being an apartheid state, that allows Israel to continue doing what it's been doing to the West Bank, which then, of course, invokes reaction, understandably, from the Palestinian resistance groups, both in the West Bank, but more importantly in Gaza. And then, you can go back to business as usual, but the bloodlust that you're seeing from Benjamin Netanyahu, that when there is one part that he is right on, he might not be a popular figure, but his actions are popular, especially
100%.
amongst the Israeli Jewish demographic polled consistently on the matter. They want him to be doing ethnic cleansing. They think it's not hard enough. They think he should go even harder.
Yeah,
So
80% of the Israeli population. I mean, that's the other thing, is that, like, I Gantz is there, but, like, what's the coalition they can put together? I mean, increasingly, Israel's Jewish population, that's, it's
their
it's
demographic terms, not ours, obviously. It is an ethno state, so
right. They has been more and more conservative, fasci, authoritarian. I mean, I think. Look, I think you had a huge influx of people who lived under the Soviet Union, and were raised in that system, which is, basically a crash course in being authoritarian, and they're brought over into Israel. And I think that, like, I think that, having a massive influx of folks like that into your body politic will have an impact. I think there was, tendencies amongst the Israeli population, as it were. Also, fundamentalists who've come, 15% maybe only from America, but a very loud and vocal and intense dynamic. Religious fanaticism breeds fanatics. And so all of these factors are working there. I'm not sure that, you would see any change of policy whatsoever with Benny Gantz. I don't know if that's even an option that exists anymore. But it seems to me you could have the Biden administration could have definitely been more aggressive with Israel up to this point and not paid a political price. I don't know what they think they're doing from here on in. It's a shit show, and I can't see how it gets better.
I don't know if I agree with you on the USSR take. I don't know if it was the Soviet migrants that came in, considering that there is a massive population of Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews in Israel that came from, like, Arab Jews specifically.
They came years and years ago.
No, I know, but I feel like in the indoctrination, especially as far as I've read into it, and you're very knowledgeable on this matter, maybe I'm misunderstanding something, but as far as I understand, their integration into Israeli society, in order to overcome, like, being second-class citizens, being regarded as, like, the same barbaric scourge that the rest of the Arab Muslims and Christians are in the eyes of, like, the fascist mythology that they were developing in Israel, for it to be an ethno-state. I feel like that integration process caused many, like the Ben Gvirs of the world, to be infinitely more reactionary than, like, some of the older population of, like, Ashkenazi Jews even.
That may be the case. To some degree. There may be like a, but I think the inclination of new immigrants, Avigdor Lieberman, and you got, and that whole sort of like influx of settlers, right? I mean, that was part of the project of putting boots on the ground. I would imagine.
Oh yeah,
a significant portion of those settlers.
It still continued to this day. Like the Russian, like, passport cycle is, like, still very much in existence. It's like a weird, like, white supremacist in the way that we understand white supremacy here in the Western world, here in America. Like, it's almost a continuation of similar policies to, like, make Israel more white, seemingly. I think that
Right.
is definitely like a genuine interest by some in the Israeli government, like a deliberate attempt.
Yeah, no, I think so. I would like to see someone do a deeper dive into that. I've always been looking around for, like, how has these shifts in demographics impacted Israeli politics, and maybe someone in Israel has done it, but I haven't come across it in these parts. But dude, before I go, let me plug this GoFundMe. Would you? A friend of mine has been helping a family in Gaza, and we're starting to see more of this, actually. But they're a family that have a child with Down syndrome, and we helped them raise some money to get them out of the country. I'm sure people know the dynamic that's associated with getting out through the Rafah gate.
Can you put that link in the Discord, if you don't mind, in the Discord chat, so I can present it here?
Yeah, I actually I got a bit.ly of it. Let's see. Where do I
just type it in the chat here.
See it?
Yep, there it is. Thank you.
And we got them. They just, like, literally just got footage of them at the Rafah gate, and almost the entire family is out. They're going into Egypt to, you know, they have nothing. There's a video I have of that, like they have 6 bags, you know, and they were in a tent in Rafah, and so it's a weird dynamic because there's so much pain and suffering there, and to focus attention or help on any individual family, it sort of cuts both ways. But I don't know. It's been at least gratifying to know that like you can directly help some people if you know, even a couple of bucks, help them get settled and this and know that you managed to save some of these people and given them an opportunity to sort of like normalize and deal with the trauma that they've been going through.
Yeah.
I just saw some video of their little girl, you know, and it really is, it's amazing, but it's so horrific. But if folks have the opportunity, please.
Yeah. Mods are pumping the link in the chat as well. Well,
Great.
Sam, thank you so much for coming on. Always a
Ron,
pleasure
always a
having you
pleasure.
here.
Great to talk to you, and keep up the good work, man. I really appreciate what you've been doing.
All right. Thank you.
Well, for
Same.
years now. So
my real uncle.
hopefully I'll get
cutting
out
off.
there soon.
Sorry, you're cutting off. Can you say that again?
Yeah, hopefully I'll get out there soon. I want
Oh, hell yeah.
to see your
That'd
place.
be great.
All right, man.
All right. Have a good one. Bye. That was Sam Seder, everybody. My real uncle, Sam Seder, and not my fake imposter uncle, Chunk Weigert, doing the most. Very reasonable voice. I always appreciate Sam's commentary and takes on the matter because I think he has a way and he has the background of you know, doing this for many, many years. I think that you know, he has a way with his words, with his commentary that appeals to a lot of people, I think, that are maybe already negatively polarized to the things that I have to say. So, you know, great stuff. I'm glad that he, you know, talked about his own personal journey of moving away from like totally lapping up ultra Zionist, ultra nationalist propaganda, all the way to questioning it and then arriving at the position that he's arrived at. And I think him not wanting to be called, no, he didn't say he doesn't want to be called anti-Zionist. He said he'd never called himself anti-Zionist. And I think that that plays a role in exactly what I was talking about. Do you understand? Andrew Filer, thank you for the 20 community gifted subs, allowing 20 people to no longer see the ads at the top of the hour, by the way. Like he does not care about being called that. He's just saying he never called himself that. People used to call him that already. I think it's more of a testament to that label being like that label immediately shutting you off for a lot of people who are positioned against it.